can't go back. There's no other way but through. So I'll trust in the Lord with faith serene till all my fears are gone. He'll send in the winds, he'll roll back the waves, he'll show me how to go on. Okay, so this journey is by no means done, and the perspective that I'm coming from, I know that the tagline for me speaking tonight was the pursuit of spiritual and emotional freedom, and it's not a concept that I have studied. It's a concept that I've come to know through my journey and through this season. I would love to study it one day. I would love to study it and create a framework that I can share that can help people. But as of this point, at this very early stage of my journey, my pursuit of spiritual and emotional freedom comes through the power of this testimony that I have through the grace of the Lord that guides me. And that is what I'm going to share with you. And I'm going to give context to it by, giving you my story, telling you my story, because that gives some background to this journey that I've been on. Some of you know me, some of you don't. So for those of you that have heard this, because I did share this with Church on the Hill, my congregation at Church on the Hill, and I have added to it because I have more time. So those of you that have heard this, I'm sorry. I'm going to relay it again, but like I said, thank you, Preston. I have added to it, so there's some additional things. So, okay, here we go. This journey is by no means done. This journey will not be over until I close my eyes and I draw my final breath. This individual is going to be under construction over the course of her entire life. The Lord continues to reveal things to me. The perspective on spiritual and emotional freedom that I'm offering you today is based off my life experience and the observations that I've made throughout the journey to this day. Like I said, one day I'd love to carry out a study on this concept, but as of now, I'll just be taking you through this journey that I've been on so I can illustrate to you the Lord's hand over my life. On May the 20th, 2017, I got up and I got myself and my youngest daughter, Taya, ready to head into Hillsborough town. The purpose of that was to buy some groceries for the celebration of my oldest daughter, Tamia's 11th birthday. It was her birthday the day before, and a couple of her friends slept over that night. And I left the house at 10:30, and whilst in Hillsborough, I started messaging friends, inviting them to our home later on that day. By 12:30, I was pulling back into our driveway, and I noticed a couple of people stood by my front step. And my first thought was, we had 2 dogs at the time, and my first thought was, what have the dogs done now? I wrongfully assumed that they'd been making a nuisance of themselves on somebody else's property, and that these people had come to tell me as such. And I got out of my car and I walked up to them, completely not recognizing the mother of one of Tamia's friends. And her words to me were, "It's not good news, Mrs. John. The emergency team are down at the lake looking for your husband and daughter to pull them out." And I can remember looking at her in disbelief and trying to comprehend what she just told me. And I can recall becoming completely disorientated and not knowing what to do. Taya was still in the car, and I needed somebody to see to her because I needed to get down to the lake. I told them to get Taya out of the car before running down to the lake, and I was cut off by a gentleman who was overseeing the search operation. And I can remember asking him in earnest if Ben and Tamia had been found. At this point, I was just hoping for hope, and he shook his head. And I tried to get past him, and he stopped me and pleaded with me to return to the house, that as soon as they were able to bring me some information, they would. I eventually started to make my way back, the gravity of the situation growing, asking myself those questions. How could this have happened? How could this be true? This cannot be happening. It can't. But sadly, I could remember waking up that morning, and I could remember all of the events of that day up until that point. This was a nightmare, and I was living it. Everything was very real. The same gentleman that headed me up at the lake came to me about an hour or so later to ask for Ben and Tamia's details, their full name, dates of birth, as well as to say that this isn't a rescue mission anymore, it's a recovery. And I was in a state of complete and utter despair. And as time progressed, and more people began to show up at my home, I remember the guys that turned up would go down to the lake, and the ladies would stay back at the house. And I remember sitting there, surrounded by Miss Anne, who was holding Taya, and Miriam, and Rebecca, and Alicia, and Stephanie. And I can remember not really knowing what to do with myself, and in the end I said that I was going to go for a walk. And I remember Miriam asking me if I wanted somebody to walk with me, and I told her that I wanted to be alone. And I walked away, and I went and sat in the front area of our house. The day had begun in such a normal way, and was fast becoming the most abnormal day that I had ever encountered. And I remember Preston and Casey pulling into my driveway, and them running over to sit with me, and I poured my heart out. And this horrible thing that was happening, my little girl and my husband were gone. And what was I going to do? How was I going to break the news that she had gone, and in such a horrible way, to my mother? To me, it was my mother's only grandchild for 10 years. And there was nothing that I could have done to save her. And the task of having to call Ben's mum and his brother Chris and tell them this terrible thing that had happened. And I could not, at the very least, have helped him, because I wasn't there. The sun went down on that day, and my daughter and husband still hadn't been found. And the following day was a Sunday, and the search began again. And I remember feeling on that day that this situation was bigger than me, and the magnitude of it was greater than what I could handle. I didn't have Ben to lean on. I didn't have Tamir to lean on. The two people in my life that I felt comfortable in being transparent with were gone. I remember the pace of the day moving painfully slowly. I remember going upstairs to our restroom in the late hours of that morning and thinking and feeling that I couldn't handle the depth of this pain, and I wanted it to be over. I couldn't live a life that required me to live with this kind of grief. It was too much, and I wanted it to stop. And there was only one way that I could achieve that. And I remember deciding that I was going to take my life. I remember that the only question at this point was, do I take Taya with me, or do I leave her behind? And in the end, I decided that she was young enough whereby she'd forget about me soon enough. I honestly believe that if I swam out to the same spot that Tamir and Ben were said to have gone under, that whatever it was that was there, that was so strong, that was able to at least overcome Tamir, because my theory on what happened to Ben is not that he drowned and was out of control of the situation. But I'll come back to that later. But I believe that it would overcome me also. And if it didn't, I would just allow myself to go under. And I remember as I stood there formulating this plan, the presence of Jesus filling the room. And I remember his presence coming over me, that created a sensation that led me to believe that he was rushing into my awareness. He was appearing with a sense of urgency. And he called me by my name, and he said, Schivonne, no. He said, you will stand again. Standing. The concept of standing, at that point, was the most foreign concept to me at that time. I felt so low that if I could have crawled into the earth, I would have. But at that point, despite how difficult a concept that was for me to grasp at that time, I remember at that point being flooded with peace and feeling a sense of comfort. And I often wondered why I ever got the sensation that Jesus rushed in at that point, because anytime I think back to that moment, I always remember the feeling of him hurrying in, almost like there wasn't a single second to spare. And a few months ago, as I was thinking about this again, at that point I was emotionally vulnerable. And if you're emotionally vulnerable, you are spiritually vulnerable. And the two go hand in hand. And if I continue to listen to the enemy, who continued to want to bulldoze his way through my life, his lies would have continued to weave their way into my thought process until those lies were able to take root and become belief systems within my mind. And when we develop belief systems, actions follow that reflect the beliefs. And it doesn't take a genius to know what my action was and what my intention was that day. But Jesus moved in with such a pace, that those lies were not given an opportunity to take root, and the voice of the enemy in that moment was shut down. So we often associate peace with stillness and harmony, and not the crescendo of chaos that I was surrounded by at that point. But that peace was a peace that, despite the chaos, I had the presence of the Lord in the midst of it, and the voice of the enemy was gone. And in its place, I received sweet shalom. I can recall washing my hands for some reason, and then going back downstairs and awaiting word about Tamir and Ben. And they were found later on that day. And I remember Pastor Mike coming in, and he came in with Miriam. And my first question, because I'd fallen asleep, and my first question was, when I woke up, was, have they been found? In the back of my mind, and I've never shared this with anybody, in the back of my mind there was a slight glimmer of hope that just maybe they just found themselves somewhere further on down the lake, and they'd managed to climb out, and they were just trying to find some form of residence where they were able to make some communication to me that they were okay. So on the one hand, I was relieved that they were found and that at least I could afford them the dignity of a burial, but at the same time, that little glimmer of hope that I had in the back of my mind was gone, because it was confirmed now. They had gone, and they weren't coming back to me. The might of the Lord was so present that day, and it didn't witness to me in the way that I would have liked, which would have been that Ben and Tamia would return to me physically. That's where I would have loved to have seen the Lord witness in my life, but instead it witnessed in other ways, and it witnessed in people. And something that I will remember and be grateful for until I draw my last breath is the application of Tom Henrik. And the way he physically stood in the gap for me and did something that spared me so much more hurt and pain on top of what I was already feeling. And he identified Ben and Tamia's body so that I didn't have to. I can't imagine the horror that would have come with that alongside what I was already having to go through. But he physically stood in the gap for me and ensured that that was something that I did not have to encounter. Ben, Tamia, and myself, Taya, we lived in that house for 5 weeks before this happened. We had just bought our first home. We just found a little spot in the world that we could call our own and grow and build in as a family. And we did not have any savings. We just bought a house. We didn't have any savings at all. Everything had gone into the process of this purchase. And yet, once again, God's witness in the form of people, physically, financially stood in the gap for me and ensured that their funeral was paid for. That I didn't have to worry about a single thing. So once again, his witness doesn't always come through in the way that we would like, but my gosh, did it come through. And I can recall on that day, Bess joining me where I was sat in the bedroom and telling me of a vision that she had while herself and the Aglow ladies in the church and the Hill ladies were praying. And this image was of Tamia, and she was stood with Jesus, and she had one hand gently held by his, and the other were clasping some flowers that looked like they had just been picked. And she had a flowery dress on befitting of her tender age, and a flower in her hair. And Bess said that she beckoned to me to return with her, and Tamia wouldn't. And Bess recalled the pure joy she saw in the eyes of Jesus, pure joy that came from the fact that his little girl was back with him. And this vision brought me much comfort, but I couldn't help thinking that despite Tamia's reluctance not to return, and despite Jesus' joy in having her, that I would have preferred it if my little girl was at home with me. I would have preferred that being the outcome of the story. Because in this time of great tragedy and loss, some of us, we lose all concept of the fact that this stage of our life was never intended on being permanent. We were never meant to remain here forever. And at times like this, your mind becomes very physical, and we focus on the fact that significant loss literally means that the bottom has fallen out of our world, causing irrevocable damage that will never show any signs of repair. Life is over, and all that is left is an existence. And we're granted that we think, until we're granted, what we think is our heart's desire at the time, and that's to join our loved ones on the other side. That's all I wanted. I just wanted to go. I just wanted to go and meet them. I had my little Taya who was 14 months old. I was expecting Mia, who was just, I was just 5 months into my pregnancy. But all I wanted was to just go and meet them. And that's where I was at this point. I had allowed the Lord's peace to deter me from taking my own life, but I was still in a place where I was just waiting for the Lord to call me home. And then from that point, I got to a point where I said, well, Lord, just keep me here until the girls are old enough. Until I got to a point where I just said, Lord, keep me here as long as you need me to be here. Preparing for their funeral, and something really poignant around that time, which was me being in receipt of cards expressing sympathy, while still receiving birthday cards which had been posted from family in England prior to the accident taking place. And the combination of the two magnifying what I should have been celebrating, but reflecting what I was having to plan instead. And Ben and Tamia's bodies were laid to rest 2 days before what would have been Ben and I's second wedding anniversary. And I remember the month before excitedly messaging Ben during the day, exclaiming that our anniversary was coming up, and his response being, "I know, love, did you think that you weren't going to have an anniversary?" And I brushed it off, like, of course I knew we were going to have an anniversary. And as it happened, the date came and it went, and we weren't able to spend it together. He wasn't here, and we didn't make the 2 years of marriage as I had hoped. And from the point in which Ben and Tamia's bodies were laid to rest, life has continued on. My little Mia, was born in September of 2017, and together with sweet little Taya, the three of us have had to grow into a normal outside of the normal that I had originally anticipated for our lives. Friends have become family. Miss Anne, for example, has become a mother, a grandmother, a friend, a confidant, and always on hand to support and assist in any way she could. And as I said earlier, the spiritual and the emotional battle has raged on. The spiritual and the emotional self are connected. My battle has not been physical, but it's been spiritual. And I have questioned and I've challenged the Lord, and I've wondered why he would allow a father, a very present father, to be removed from the lives of his children. We have enough children that have had to live with absent fathers in today's society. And I question why you had to take my children's father from them. He was a godly man that ministered to people. He ministered to men as they carried out their sentences in the local jail. Did we really need less of these kind of men in our society? And Tamia, a kind of considerate little girl who would pray for the people that she didn't necessarily get along with, and would take extra lunch to school for the friends of hers that didn't have enough? Does it seem justified that the world would have one less person like her? I've called out to Tamia. I have called her name. I have screamed her name. I've called her name dozens of times, hoping that she would answer and come back to me. I've sat in my classroom at the end of the school day thinking to myself that if I sat there long enough, that she would eventually come through the door she always used to once the school bus has dropped her off. I sit back and I look around at her friends who are growing and thriving as they progress through these tender stages of life, and I think of how much she should be with them, how much she should be amongst them, and I have begged the Lord to let her come back to me. But nothing. I've asked the question why more times than I care to remember. And Granger Smith, who lost his son about a couple of months ago now, following an accident at their home, said, "We're going to constantly search for the meaning behind the accident, not the reason. We're not going to get caught up in the reason, because we will never know, but we will find the good." And there's no denying the fact that my walk with the Lord has become stronger, so much stronger, and so much more meaningful. When I'm not tuned into the Lord, and I maintain a very physical mindset, the enemy will try to get me to remember. Remember what your God did. Remember what he let happen. Just remember that Ben and Tamia aren't here anymore, and you've got your God to thank for that. And how many times has the enemy tried to do that to us during our daily walks? Remember what that person said. Remember how they made you feel. Remember what they did to you. Don't forget. And if you're vulnerable enough, you take offense. You take offense against the person or the circumstance, the situation. And sadly, we've all done it. We take offense against God. And you find yourself wondering why we serve a God that is so big, yet that has allowed such hurt and upset and upheaval in our life. Just like my question to him one time, which was, why do I even believe in you? With the offense we take against God, we become angry. And with the anger taking root, we fall away from him. We fall away from his word, and essentially, we fall away from his promises. God's promise to me was that I would stand again. And if I remained turned away as I began to turn away on that day, I never would have seen the day of that promise come to pass and come into fruition. If my life didn't end that day, it would have ended soon after that day. I would have never known what it felt like to stand again. So while the enemy is trying to get you to remember, the Bible tells us to take off the old man. It tells us to not put new wine into old wineskin. You can't put old into the new, because ultimately that would lead to destruction. The wineskin will burst, is what Jesus said. So effectively, we're required to unburden our lives from the remembrance of the past. And if we want to enter into the new, we have to let go of the old. The two cannot exist together. Hurt emotions, thoughts and feelings, they're not to be stuffed away, they are to be dealt with. I'm not saying that it's easy to just forget, okay? You do need closure. But it's important that we unburden. And something that I lived with, for just over 2 years was a deep-rooted anger, sadly, that, the husband that I loved so much when he was here, a deep-rooted anger towards Ben. I was angry that he couldn't save my daughter. I was so angry that he wasn't able to prevent this. I was angry that we came to this new place. I traveled all this way to have this happen just 18 months into Tamir being here. And I'm being honest, I hated him at times, and I'm sorry. Because I know that, there are so many people that loved Ben, and I love Ben. But I have to be honest, because if I'm not honest, you won't see just how much junk the Lord has removed from my life, and how much glory He has brought into this situation. So I have to be honest. I went through one of the ugly phases of grief, and it was really, really hard. I was so upset that he could not save her, because Ben was big, and he was brave, and he was one of those people that was invincible. I mean, that's the type of perception you had of him, because he always had so many stories, and he had so many things that he had encountered in his life, and he was never afraid of anything. So why was it that big, brave Ben, the adventurer that scaled mountains and that dirt biked, could not save my little girl? And then to add insult to injury, he couldn't survive so that he could stand accountable to let me know what happened, how this could have happened. And then one day, and this was just a couple of months ago, I was in my kitchen, and the Lord came to me again, and He called me by my name again, and He said, Schivonne, please have some compassion towards my son. I got the sensation that the Lord was grieving, and He was so sad because He loved Ben so much, and yet I carried all of this anger towards him, and this pained the Lord deeply. And there were a few moments that passed where the Lord's words were given an opportunity to resonate, and I'm stood on the receiving end, and after a little more time, the Lord said, He gave everything He had. Not everything He had was taken from Him, but He gave everything He had, and He did it willingly. He reminded me of John 15:13, and reminded me that there was no greater love shed that day. And after I delivered this at Church on the Hill, Bess came to see me. And she's never shared this with me, and I don't know if she shared this with anyone, but she shared something that day that had been in my spirit. And to me, that was confirmation of what I believed. The heaviness of the Lord's grief was there, and I was stood there. And after 2 years, I saw Ben from the perspective that the Lord wanted me to view him. Not as a person that I felt failed me, but as the Lord's beloved, beloved Son. And this dense fog that I had been surrounded by for the past 2 years began to lift. And light was flooding my spirit. The resentment, the hurt, the anger started to diffuse, and then it was gone. And in its place was a lightness that I had not felt in a long, long time. When I viewed Ben and Tamir in the funeral home, Tamir, my little girl, she looked just like she looked when she was asleep. And Ben, I mean, I've never seen anybody with such a look of peace on his face. And I just knew that all was well with him. All was well. But there's still a lot of junk, because you don't just immediately become this new individual that has this new perspective, that is able to navigate their way through life. There are still things that kind of tag on, and I've questioned Ben, and I've said, how could you have left us? There's 18 months between my two girls, and they are just like their father. They are so active all of their time. To me, it was the calmest, and they say this about the first child. To me, it was the calmest child in the world, and she was so easy. And I'm not saying that Taya and Mia are not easy, but they're very, 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 very busy. We chose to start a family together. I mean, me and Ben, we chose to start a family together. The responsibility requires the both of us. How could you leave us? And one thing I can say about Ben is how much the word meant to him and how he believed it implicitly. And when my uncle died back in 2016, and my uncle was very close to me, and while Ben did console me and empathize with me, he reminded me of Ecclesiastes. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Ben, no matter what was going on, he would always return to the word. And sometimes you wanted to hear it, sometimes you didn't, because it was like, I'm really just wanting to feel sad, okay? But he had a very, very practical approach, and it was apply the word to your life, regardless of what you're going through. You have to believe it. It is the word of God. It is the word of God. You have to believe it. And he would tell me that, and he wanted me to understand that this is what the word says, despite how you feel. So this is what you have to believe. And I honestly believe in my heart of hearts that when Ben gave his life, because I believe that he did give his life. This wasn't an accident for him. It was an accident for Tamia. But it wasn't for him, because I believe he went willingly, because he refused to allow him to go alone. Greater love hath no man than this, that a man that lays down his life. And I know that before Ben drew his last breath, him knowing that Romans 8:28 says, all things work together for good to them that love God. Yes, he was leaving his wife. Yes, he was leaving his daughter. Yes, he was leaving behind the child yet to be born. But the God that he served was a miracle-working God, and he knew that ultimately we were going to be okay. And that's not a romanticized view that I have of how my husband passed away. That's a view that I have in the spirit with regards to what I truly believe happened that day. And when Beth came and spoke to me, that was confirmation, because we've never interacted over this at all, never. And he did all of that for a little girl that he'd barely known for 2 years. He lived the word of God. And his final act was completed with a peaceful heart, because his belief in the God that he served. All was well. Quick story, May 18th, 2018, I attended school that day. That day, the year before, was Tamia's last day on this earth. It was the day of her birthday, and I went to school. I felt okay that day, but after about 10 minutes, the emotions flooded in, and I couldn't remain, and thankfully I had a great principal and a great team, and I was able to leave. And I went to the cemetery, and I sat in between Ben and Tamia's grave, and I spotted on Tamia's grave a little heart-shaped rock. And I saw it as a little gift from her, and I picked it up, and I've kept it with me to this day. And later on that year, during the summer, I took my girls to New Mexico when we were in Taos, and I took them to the Taos Pueblos. And I went to one of the little local shops, and I saw a silver bracelet. It caught my eye, because it had a heart-shaped turquoise in the middle that looked very much like the little rock that I saw on Tamia's grave. And I just picked it up, and I was looking at it. And the gentleman that owned the store, he came to me and he said, because the turquoise is named after the mine that they were found in, extracted from, and he came to me and he said, that particular turquoise, that particular heart-shaped turquoise that looked just like the heart-shaped rock that I found on Tamia's grave that day, is called Sleeping Beauty. Oh. And it's little reminders that ultimately all is well, and that this part of the journey is just a segment. It's just a segment. And a couple of weeks ago, I was thinking about my marriage and my original prayers to the Lord regarding marriage. And I guess my thoughts reached the Lord because he spoke to me. I asked the Lord for a godly man. It was 2014. And I asked the Lord for a godly man that would lead me. I wanted a godly man that would lead me into a deeper relationship with the Lord through him modeling what that looked like. I wanted a closer, more significant, and meaningful walk with the Lord. And I wanted a man whose walk was so magnified to my eyes that it would create a way for me. And literally, maybe about a couple of months later, along came Ben. And I loved how we had conversations about the Word, and he'd help me with my Bible studies, and he'd make real-time geographical references to the ancient kingdoms mentioned in the Bible. Questions that I asked, he would answer. And then 2 weeks after, so this was 2014, and 9 months later, I'm in Hillsborough, and 2 weeks later, we get married. I didn't get to know him a great deal. He was pretty wild because he was a very adventurous person, and I often think, well, maybe it's just a good thing that we didn't spend too much time getting to know each other, because he was an adventurer kind of a person, and I was a homebody, so. But he saw something in me, and, we got married, and, I got my godly man, and it was wonderful. He was an amazing guy, and his attitude to life was unique, and he was one of those people that left an impression on you. You didn't meet people like him often. And even if he wasn't my husband and he was just a friend, I would still describe him in the same way. And then I thought, because we were only married for just less than 2 years, maybe I should have put a time frame on it with this prayer that I had. I want us to have the opportunity to celebrate our ruby wedding anniversary. But what came to me in that moment was how much of Ben was left behind. He was unique, and he did leave me, and I realized that. The Lord didn't just send me a husband that would lead me throughout the time that we were physically together. He sent me a husband that would not only lead me, but blazed a trail throughout my life, so that long after he was gone, his influence would continue to lead me. And I'm still walking in the trail that Ben created for me long before he journeyed home. So, another quick story. July 2016, we went to Silverton, Colorado, and Tay was 14 weeks old. I had a little town. We went camping with some friends, and we'd spend our days skating the mountains. And I hated it because I just didn't like feeling like I was out of control, and we were going over these precarious passes, and it wasn't my idea of fun. And anything that requires me to be scared 98% of the time is not my idea of fun, it's not a deal. But then he loved it, and he didn't tolerate complaints very well, unless you had a good reason to complain, so I just maintained my decorum and, continued with these rides. And, my brother Chris back there, he had seen some land that was in Silverton where we were, and before we left I said, well, we could go check out that land for you. So he didn't have that expectation, but, I just thought, well, why not? We could give you, a little bit of information on the area. So, Ben and I and Tay had set off again to me, wanted to stay back and play with the other kids. And, I stopped off at the store to get the directions to this piece of land, and the owner told me, which direction we had to go. And I had spent the entire morning with my heart in my mouth because we were scaling these mountains. And Chris's land was by the water, so I'm thinking, Valley, this is safe. I mean, awesome. And little do I know, lo and behold, we're scaling another mountain once again. And I was like, Chris Montes. And I was so, my heart crawled back up into my mouth again, and there I was again, And, we went skating mountains again, and we found the plot of land, and I was able to report back to Chris, and we got to a point, and there was this stream, and Ben, he drove his Xterra, and there was this stream, and I was like, well, it looks like we'll have to turn back, and he said, why? And he just flicked some switches on his car, and we just drove across the stream, and that was his attitude to life. I mean, he had a very fearless approach, and again, like I say, the Lord sent a man that would lead me long after he was gone, and I continue to remember all these little experiences that we have through life, and they give me strength, because he modeled an exceptional example of what it looks like to have the ultimate faith and to be completely absent of fear. That's what he did for me, and he still continues to do that. When we look at growth models, because this is part of the emotional and spiritual walk that we have, when we look at growth models, there's a growth model that consists of 3 zones. And you have your comfort zone, which is where we like to spend the majority of our time, and then you have your stretch zone, and you have your panic zone. And in order to grow, you have to spend time in each of those 2 zones outside of your comfort zone. It's not advisable to spend an extensive period of time, for example, in your panic zone, because that will have a completely negative effect on you, okay? But it's important to touch into those zones. And spending time outside of my comfort zone with Ben really did signify what our journey as a married couple looks like. I spent a lot of time in my stretch zone. I spent a lot of time in my panic zone because my husband was an adventurer and I was not. These things didn't come naturally to me. But I'm telling you, those mountains I was so scared of, that I hated going through, that was an ordeal for me. In 2018 and 2019, who's driving with her 2 children in the back of her car over 650 miles to another state, to New Mexico and to Colorado, to those very same mountains that were so scary and so fearsome to me once upon a time. And that was me. Okay? So comfort zones, stretch zones, panic zones, they're all significant and they feel uncomfortable at the time. Anything outside your comfort zone feels uncomfortable because it's essential. It's essential to growth. So what can be gained? There's nothing like a life's trial that has the power to drastically change your relationship with God, your walk, your prayer life, a pivotal point that enables a greater degree of reverence and obedience when you allow Him to orchestrate and coordinate the direction of your life to a greater degree without the resistance that you may have demonstrated in the past. It's the opportunity to grow with God. Ben and Tammy are no longer physically with me, but how can I allow for the influence that they had over my life to change the way I do life? What characteristics and attributes can I draw from them and their existence that can ensure that they'll never, ever really be gone? I would sometimes wonder, why did it have to be this way? Sue O'Neill introduced me to the concept of the perfect will of God and the permissive will of God. And there's no denying the fact that we live in a fallen world and terrible things happen. God allows these things to happen. Thankfully, we serve a God that works all things for the good of those that love Him. Not just the things that align with His perfect will, but the things that also align with His permissive will as well. Scripture tells us, no eye has seen, no ear has heard, and no mind has imagined what God has prepared for those who love Him. I love the mystery and the magnitude of that. The quest to find reasons and meanings set aside, life, including its trials, requires us to resort to the one fundamental concept of life, the greatest commandment, and that is love. And it's a love for God. You have to love Him through all the questions and all the unanswered moments in your life, through the ordeals. You have to love Him through, because He loves us through it all. Meshach, Shadrach, Abednego, they chose to go through. I didn't choose to go through. When this was happening in the earliest stages, I chose to end it the day after it happened, because I could not manage the gravity of the emotion that I was feeling at the time and the future that I had ahead of me. I could not imagine it without Ben, without Tamir, and living a life as a grieving wife and as a grieving mother. Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego, they chose to go through the furnace. They chose to go through. And what did we see as a result of them going through? We saw a miracle performed that day. And if we choose to go through, as much as we feel the heat, and as much as we feel the pressure, we also will see the miracles and the promises that the Lord has for us as we get through that process with Him, and He will be with you. Jesus was at the front of them. He was at the front. And that's exactly where He is with us as well. By loving the Lord, we stay focused on Him, and we stay focused on His word. We stay focused on His His promises, and we do stay focused on His presence as well. And we walk through the furnace with Him. We remain pressed in, protected by the shadow of His wing, and our perspectives cannot become distorted by the enemy. There is not a greater weapon against the enemy than a man or a woman that loves the Lord. The aftermath of this life's trial is all for His glory, and seeing the perfect work of His hand in the life of myself and my children. It's not about me, and it's not about me standing here as a strong woman. It's just about me standing here as a child of God, whose Father has led them through the seasons. Season after season after season, and so it goes on and it continues. About 2 years ago, I coined a phrase, and that was beautifully engineered. And it came to me one day, and it was a reflection of the Lord's work when He created us. And this year I added the word now to that, so it became beautifully engineered now, to reflect the fact that time is of the essence. And what I also like about the phrase is that the first letter of each word spell out Ben's name as a commemoration to him. That was not intentional, but it happened that way, and that I thought was awesome. And we don't have to wait until, we have to tell ourselves, well, I need to wait until this point before I can press into what God is laying on my heart. And once I've done this, once I've got to this stage in life, then I can start to listen to the Lord and allow him to work with me and work through this thing that he's put on my heart. And what I like about the concept of being beautifully engineered now is that it's not just a concept, it's a truth. You are designed and you are engineered. You are a child of God. You don't have to wait for anything unless he tells you to wait. That's when you wait. But there is no reason to hold yourself back and talk yourself out of what he's placed on your heart, because you feel, not the Lord, you feel that I just don't quite have things as I would like them to be to make this comfortable for me, because it's not always going to be comfortable. And part of the pursuit of being spiritually and emotionally free is that you do have to go through some uncomfortable stages and phases, because ultimately you have to be obedient and do what the Lord is asking you to do. Say what the Lord is asking you to say. Express yourself in the way that the Lord is asking you to express yourself. These are things that are kind of weaving their way into the very fibers of your being that are a reflection of the person that he has beautifully engineered, and that person exists right now. Right now. Everything on this planet is the Lord's. Everything. There isn't a single thing under the surface of the sun and beyond that is not his. And if he wants to give it to you, he will. You have no right to talk yourself out of anything, or thinking that you just are not capable, or you are not competent, or this is not something that people like you do. You have no right to feel that way. You have no right to think that, because there's not a single thing that he cannot give to you. If he wants to give it to you, he will. But you have to be open to receive it. Psalm 110 says, thy people shall be willing in the day of thy power. Thy is God. And at what point is God without power? You need to be willing. And that is a choice. That is a choice that you have to make. Do you want to will yourself into walking in the power of the Lord and maintain the person that he designed you to be? Not who your parents said you were, not who your siblings or your friends said you were, okay, as much as they can say wonderfully supportive things, but ultimately it's who God says you are. You have the power, you have the anointing. So what are you doing with it? Whatever you think you're lacking, know that he will equip you. Of course, if you're required to be still, then be still. But if he requires you to move, then move. Whenever you're having a moment of thought that consists of doubt, where you allow fear and apprehension to creep in, just remember, you're beautifully engineered now. And if you're moving through the walk with gusto, then don't ever forget that you're beautifully engineered now. And that term only works in real time. So if you messed up yesterday or 10 seconds ago, those moments are irrelevant to the fact that you're beautifully engineered now. And that is your identity. The story of Gideon, where he was chafing the wheat at the bottom of the winepress due to the Israelites' fear of the Midianites. Chafing wheat is something to be done effectively out in the open, but the circumstances meant that it was to be done in a concealed environment for the sake of being able to maintain control and ownership over what they had. The angel of the Lord appeared to him and called him by his identity, something we have to be reminded of. Sometimes the Lord will call you by your identity. Sometimes he'll call you by your name, as he did with me twice, because he needed to get my attention in an instant. And he called Gideon mighty hero. Gideon, who's at the bottom of a winepress chafing wheat. And if I was Gideon at that time, I probably would have looked around to see if there was anybody else in there that I didn't notice, because I can't imagine he felt like he was that brave hero that the angel was referring to. But again, you must remember your identity in the Lord. I went through a significant crisis of confidence when Ben and Smee passed away. With Ben being married to him, my identity changed. And I didn't know when he passed away what I was supposed to do. Do I go back to the Schivonne that was Schivonne back in England? Do I maintain the Schivonne who is Schivonne here now that I'm in Hillsborough, Texas, so that my children can get some understanding of, what it would be like to be parented by the father based on how I parent them, because I was heavily influenced by Ben as my leader and my husband. What do I do? And for 2 years, I've often wondered, who do I become now? Who am I really? And the Lord came to me and he told me that the Schivonne that you were in England is irrelevant. The Schivonne that you became as a result of being married to Ben is irrelevant, because your identity lies in me. Yes. You don't have to worry about the then and who you became. Your identity lies in me, and that is where you need to place your mind. I started writing back in 2017, and it served as an outlet, and it started as mending a broken heart. And as the Lord continued to reveal himself, I added to it, and it became a story of love, and that love was a love that he had for me and my family. And then I added to that a journey of hope. And then I added to that God's reconciliation of a new conclusion. And then whilst in New Mexico, I added another subtitle, which was Growing with God, and so it continues, and it's a reflection of my journey, So in terms of the practical steps to achieving emotional and spiritual freedom, really, it's quite simple. You have to resign yourself to the fact that you have to allow the Lord to do his work. It's not always going to be rainbows and butterflies and daisies. There were times when I'd say to the Lord, I am feeling the heat, I'm feeling the pressure, and this is rough, but you have to be obedient. There are things the Lord will require you to do or say. There's a person the Lord will require you to be that you may not feel comfortable being. There are times the Lord will require you to be just like a baby and just fall into his arms and allow his loving and warm embrace to surround you and weave its way into the fibers of the body that he created. The quest for spiritual and emotional freedom is intentional and it's deliberate. During our brokenness, there are times where we don't feel like we have the emotional energy to be intentional or deliberate. We feel like we're melting down and we're caving in on ourselves. And that's where we're required to just be still. Don't try to rationalize or justify, just be still. And know that your God is doing... Sorry, I've lost myself for a second there. And know who your God is and what he's commanded you to do. And that's to not fear, to not fray. Don't worry about tomorrow. You will not be in want. Just be still and know. So think about what opportunities you have to unburden. I pursued the Pursuing Freedom ministry. It wasn't something that I wanted to do. I'm not very good with being transparent. I didn't want to go and, lay my life out to anybody because I'm relatively a private person. I just did not want to do that. But the Lord pressed on at me and pressed on at me, and I resisted until eventually he came to me in a dream, and he made reference to the fact that there are strongholds over my life that need to be broken, and he gave to me the number 4. And I messaged Donna the following day, and I asked her what the number 4 meant and how that related to me completing this ministry, and she was able to translate that for me. And so from that point, as uncomfortable as I felt with the idea of doing it, I just prayed for peace, and I prayed for an ability to be candid, and ultimately that's what I was able to do. So it's not always going to be an easy process. It really isn't. It wasn't for me. Like I said, there were some very difficult stages as you progress through the process, but I promise you, it's all for the greater good. You have to accept that being emotionally free is a choice, and being spiritually free is a choice. One of the things that I felt the Holy Spirit encouraged me to pray for was joy. Pray for a joy-filled life, and that seemed like an alien concept. How could I pray for a joy-filled life? I've lost my husband, I've lost my oldest daughter. How could I really ever truly experience joy? And eventually I became obedient and I started praying for it, and it was really uncomfortable for me. But the more I prayed it, the more comfortable it became, to the point where I was able to pray for it with an enthusiasm and a motivation, like, yes, Lord, that is what I want. I want joy, and I don't just want the joy that we encounter on a day-to-day basis. I want a supernatural joy. I want a joy that is so significant that people can just look at me and see it. That's the kind of joy that I want. I want non-believers to see it. And when they see it, I want them to ask me, what is it that you have? What is that? And I can tell them about the Lord that I serve. That's the kind of joy that I want. And I'm telling you, there have been times over the course of this season in my life that my heart has been so happy that it could just burst. I mean, it has felt so happy and so full. And my soul, if you could hear my soul sing, you would. There have been times when I have felt so joyful. But there was an obedience in that. I had to listen to what the Holy Spirit was saying. I had to go through the discomfort of praying for something that I didn't originally believe that I could ever feel. And in time, it came to pass. Because our God is a covenant-keeping God. His promises are true. They are real, and He is faithful.
Yes.
As Pastor Mike says, I'm about to land the plane. Thank you for bearing with me. I'm a very verbal person when I write, so thank you for bearing with me. So, honestly, like I said, I'm coming from a place of experience in terms of, what I've encountered. So, how do you achieve spiritual and emotional freedom? You have to choose it. You have to want it. Let it become a desire of your heart. Ask for it. Pray about it. Pray about it. Pray about it. And don't let the fact that you may not be feeling the effects of being emotionally and spiritually free as indication that you are not going to feel it. Because the Lord's process has a time frame, and there is purpose to every single stage. We don't like time. We don't like waiting. We live in a society where we can just pay for things to make things become accelerated or expedited. And this is something that we need to step back in time for and just learn how to wait. Because we know those best meals that we cook, they're the ones that take time. Not the convenient meals that we go for just because we don't have the time, So you have to choose. You make the choice. You have to be obedient. Because like I said, the Lord is going to require you to do things that you're not going to want to do. He's going to take you through seasons and moments of discomfort, and you have to keep on trusting Him through the process. Obedience is absolutely key. So choose the spiritual freedom and emotional freedom. Be obedient. Make yourself available to what's available around you. The Pursuing Freedom Ministry is something they do at Church on a Hill. You don't have to be a member in order to be able to encounter it yourself. And trust the Lord, because He is so faithful. His promises are true, and He's carrying you through for the things that you ask for and for the things that you don't ask for. And remember your identification in Him. It's so significantly important. It's not based off man's perception of you, it's based on His perception of you. And He wants you to view yourself with the confidence that He has in you. Look at yourself through His eyes, not your own, okay? So what I did is I brought along something with me. And thank you, Preston. And some of you may already have this. I saw this on Saturday when I was at this answer, and I thought, that's awesome. And what I wanted to do, which is what happened, is, we made some copies. And if you don't already have this, it's Who Am I? And I'm not going to read it out because you spent so long listening to me already, but there are a number of scriptural quotes here that refer to your identity. And I would like you to take one if you don't already have one. I would like you to stick it on your bathroom mirror. And every morning when you wake up, whether you read the whole thing, or you just remember or read a single line, just one single quote, just remind yourself every single day of your identification in Him. And I'm telling you, a joy-filled life is a choice.
Amen.
A spiritually free life is a choice. An emotionally free life is a choice. Choose it. Be obedient. You are beautifully engineered now. And my question is, what trail are you blazing today?